There is a dangerous illusion that keeps millions of people trapped in relationships that slowly destroy them. And the illusion sounds innocent. It whispers, "If I just love them enough, they will change." But what if the real trap is not love? What if the real trap is a psychological game you don't even realize you're playing? A game where the rules are invisible. A game where your emotions are the pieces. And the more you try to fix the relationship, the deeper you fall into the trap. Toxic relationships rarely begin with obvious cruelty. They begin with intensity, with attention, with a connection that feels almost magical. But beneath that intensity lies a subtle psychological pattern, a mind game. And the terrifying part is this: most people only realize they were in the game after years of emotional exhaustion. Today, we're going to expose the hidden psychological mechanism that fuels toxic relationships. Once you see it, you will never look at certain relationships the same way again. Toxic relationships rarely begin with obvious cruelty. They rarely announce themselves as something dangerous. In fact, they often begin in a way that feels almost magical. The beginning feels intoxicating. The connection feels rare. And the attention you receive feels deeper than anything you have experienced before. At first, everything seems extraordinary. The person gives you intense attention. Messages arrive constantly. Your phone lights up with their name again and again throughout the day. Conversations stretch late into the night, moving from simple topics to deeply personal confessions. They ask questions about your childhood, your fears, your dreams. They listen in a way that makes you feel understood, and for the first time in a long while, you feel seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. There is something deeply powerful about that experience. Human beings carry a quiet hunger to be understood. Most people walk through life feeling slightly invisible, slightly misunderstood. But when someone suddenly appears and gives you complete emotional attention, something inside you awakens. Your mind begins to associate this person with warmth, comfort, and validation. Psychologists refer to this phase as love bombing. It is a stage of overwhelming emotional intensity where affection, attention, and admiration are delivered in powerful waves. Compliments come quickly. Promises appear early. The connection seems almost too perfect to be real, and in many cases that is exactly the problem. Because during this stage, something very important is happening inside your brain. Dopamine begins to rise. Dopamine is the chemical associated with reward and pleasure. It is the same neurological system activated by exciting experiences, gambling, or even addictive substances. When someone showers you with intense emotional attention, your brain begins to form a powerful association. This person becomes the source of emotional reward. Your mind begins to believe something dangerous without realizing it. You begin to believe that this feeling came from them. But the hidden trap is this: that intensity is rarely sustainable. Human emotions naturally fluctuate. No relationship can maintain that initial level of intensity forever. Real relationships eventually settle into something calmer, more stable, more grounded. But in toxic dynamics, something different happens. Instead of transitioning into stable affection, the warmth begins to disappear. The same person who once sent long messages suddenly becomes distant. The same voice that once felt comforting now feels cold or distracted. Conversations grow shorter. Attention fades. Sometimes criticism appears where admiration once lived. And suddenly something strange begins happening inside you. You start chasing something, not the person themselves, but the feeling they once created. Your mind begins replaying the early memories of the relationship. You remember the long conversations, the compliments, the way they looked at you, the way they made you feel special, and you begin to ask yourself a quiet question. What happened? What changed? But instead of stepping away, many people move in the opposite direction. They try harder. They become more attentive, more patient, more forgiving. They invest more energy trying to bring back the warmth that once existed. This is where the psychological mind game truly begins. Because now the relationship is no longer balanced. It has turned into a pursuit, Your brain is trying to recreate the emotional high that existed in the beginning. Just like someone chasing the memory of a powerful experience, you begin hoping that if you say the right things, do the right things, or love them enough, the magic will return. But what you may not realize is that this pattern creates a powerful emotional trap. The more the warmth disappears, the more valuable it begins to feel. Moments of affection become rare, and because they are rare, they become incredibly powerful when they appear again. A single kind message suddenly feels like proof that everything can still be fixed. Your brain begins clinging to those moments. You stop evaluating the relationship based on its overall reality. Instead, you judge it based on flashes of how it once felt. And slowly, without realizing it, you are no longer standing inside a healthy connection. You are standing inside a psychological pursuit. You are chasing the memory of a feeling that once existed, hoping it will return if you just try a little harder. And the deeper you chase that feeling, the deeper the mind game pulls you in. There is a psychological pattern so powerful that it can keep intelligent, self-aware people trapped in emotional chaos for years without fully understanding why they cannot walk away. It is subtle, almost invisible, yet incredibly effective. Psychologists call this pattern intermittent reinforcement. At first, the concept seems simple, but once you understand it, you begin to see it everywhere. Casinos have known this principle for decades. Slot machines do not reward players every time they pull the lever. If they did, the game would quickly lose its grip. Instead, the reward appears randomly. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes the machine lights up with a small win. Occasionally, it delivers a larger reward. And strangely enough, that randomness is what makes the game addictive. The brain begins anticipating the possibility of the next reward. Each time the lever is pulled, the mind whispers a quiet possibility, maybe this time. This pattern creates one of the most powerful conditioning loops known in psychology. Now imagine that same system operating inside a relationship. In toxic relationships, affection does not appear consistently. Instead, it arrives unpredictably. One day the person seems distant. Messages are short. Their tone feels cold. You sense something is wrong, but you cannot quite explain what it is. The next day, they suddenly become warm again. They send a kind message. They apologize for their behavior. They tell you they miss you. For a moment, everything feels normal again. That familiar emotional warmth returns, and you feel relief wash over your mind. But then the pattern repeats. Distance returns. Silence appears. Confusion grows. And once again, your mind begins searching for answers. What did I do wrong? Did I say something that upset them? Should I try harder? This is where the psychological conditioning quietly deepens. Your brain begins linking emotional relief with the rare moments of affection you receive. Each time the person becomes kind again, your mind experiences a powerful emotional reward. The tension disappears, the anxiety fades, and for a brief moment everything feels safe again. That relief becomes incredibly powerful. Because human beings are not only motivated by pleasure, they are also strongly motivated by the removal of pain. When the cycle moves from emotional pain to emotional relief, your brain registers that relief is something valuable. And because the relief is unpredictable, it becomes even more meaningful. Pain, then relief. Distance, then affection. Cold silence, then sudden kindness. Your mind begins waiting for those moments the same way a gambler waits for the next win. At first, you may still notice the imbalance. You may still feel uncomfortable with the unpredictability. But as time passes, something inside you slowly adjusts. You begin tolerating more emotional discomfort in exchange for the possibility of emotional reward. This is where the dangerous shift begins. Your standards quietly start to drop. Behavior that once would have alarmed you now feels strangely normal. The long gaps in communication, the sudden mood changes, the apologies that promise change but rarely deliver it, these patterns begin to feel like just another part of the relationship. And each time the person shows affection again, your mind clings to it as proof that things can still work. You remember the warmth. You remember the connection. You tell yourself that maybe they are just going through something difficult. Maybe they just need time. Maybe things will stabilize eventually. But what is actually happening beneath the surface is far more psychological than romantic. Your mind is being conditioned. Each unpredictable moment of affection strengthens the attachment rather than weakening it. The inconsistency itself becomes the hook. The emotional uncertainty keeps your brain engaged, constantly searching for the next moment of relief. And without realizing it, the relationship begins to resemble something far closer to an addiction than a partnership. You start needing the moments of affection to balance out the emotional pain. You begin enduring more confusion, more anxiety, more emotional instability, just to experience those small moments when everything briefly feels right again. This is how many toxic relationships slowly tighten their grip, not through constant cruelty, but through a repeating cycle of emotional withdrawal and emotional reward. Over time, the connection becomes less about mutual care and more about psychological dependency. And the most unsettling part is that the mind rarely notices when this transformation begins. Because from the inside, it still feels like love. One of the most devastating consequences of a toxic relationship is not the arguments, the harsh words, or even the moments of emotional distance. Those things are painful, yes, but they are not the deepest damage. The real damage happens quietly, almost invisibly, beneath the surface of your identity. It is the slow erosion of your self-worth. In the beginning, when something feels wrong, your instincts usually speak clearly. You notice the inconsistency. You sense the emotional instability. When they say something hurtful or dismissive, a voice inside you whispers that this behavior is not right. At first, you question the relationship. You wonder why their actions do not match their words. You wonder why affection appears and disappears without explanation. You wonder why moments that should feel safe suddenly feel confusing or tense. Your mind searches for clarity. But as the relationship continues, something subtle begins to shift. Instead of questioning the relationship, you begin questioning yourself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I misunderstood what they meant. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe the problem is me. This quiet psychological shift is one of the most dangerous transformations that can occur inside a human mind. Because the moment you begin doubting your own perception, you slowly surrender one of the most powerful protections. You possessed your trust in yourself. Your perception is your internal compass. It is the ability to recognize when something feels healthy and when something feels harmful. But when that compass becomes unreliable, the entire emotional landscape becomes unstable. And this is where many toxic partners gain their hidden power. They do not always attack directly. In fact, the manipulation is often subtle. It happens through small distortions of reality, repeated over time until confusion replaces certainty. One of the most well-known tactics used in this pattern is gaslighting. Gaslighting is not always dramatic. It rarely appears as obvious lies. Instead, it unfolds through quiet contradictions. They deny things they clearly said. You remember a conversation vividly, but when you bring it up, they respond with calm confidence. I never said that. You're remembering it wrong. That never happened. At first, you resist the contradiction. You know what you heard. You know what you experienced. But when this pattern repeats again and again, something begins to happen inside your mind. You start doubting your memory. You begin replaying events in your head, searching for mistakes in your own understanding. The certainty you once had slowly fades, replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty. And that uncertainty becomes fertile ground for manipulation. Sometimes they twist events in subtle ways. An argument you remember clearly becomes a story, where you are suddenly the one who overreacted. A concern you expressed becomes evidence that you are too emotional. A boundary you tried to establish becomes a sign that you are difficult or demanding. Gradually, the narrative changes. The problem is no longer their behavior. The problem becomes your reaction to it. And when that shift takes hold, the psychological balance of the relationship changes dramatically. You begin apologizing for things that once felt reasonable. You begin suppressing your concerns because you fear being seen as dramatic or irrational. You begin walking on emotional eggshells, carefully choosing your words so you do not trigger another conflict. Your voice becomes quieter. Your confidence becomes smaller. Your inner certainty begins to fade. And the most painful part is that this transformation rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly, over time, through hundreds of small moments that reshape the way you see yourself. Eventually, something profound changes. You stop trusting your own judgment. You start relying on the other person to define what is real, what is reasonable, and what is acceptable. Their interpretation of events begins to carry more weight than your own feelings. When someone loses trust in their own perception, they become extremely vulnerable to manipulation. Without that internal compass, it becomes difficult to recognize when boundaries are being crossed. And once that vulnerability exists, control quietly replaces love. The relationship begins to revolve around emotional power rather than emotional connection. One person becomes the center of reality, while the other slowly adapts, adjusts, and sacrifices pieces of themselves in order to maintain peace. By the time many people realize what has happened, they feel like strangers to themselves. The confident voice they once had is gone. The clarity they once trusted feels distant. And the person they used to be seems buried beneath layers of doubt that were never truly theirs to carry. Another hidden psychological trap inside toxic relationships is far more subtle than manipulation or emotional withdrawal. It does not appear cruel. It often appears noble. In fact, many people fall into it because it feels compassionate, even heroic. It is the quiet belief that you can fix the other person. At first, the relationship may already carry tension, confusion, or instability. But then you begin to see something else beneath the surface. You begin to notice their wounded side. There are moments when their guard drops. Moments when their voice softens and they reveal pieces of their past. They speak about childhood struggles, about betrayal, about the pain they experienced long before you ever met them. And suddenly, something inside you awakens. You see not just the person who hurts you, but the person who was once hurt. You begin to see their anger as pain, their distance as fear, their coldness as the result of wounds they never learned how to heal. And because you care deeply, a powerful instinct begins to form inside you. The instinct to help, the instinct to heal, the instinct to rescue. Many people who enter this psychological pattern are naturally empathetic. They feel other people's emotions strongly. They believe that love, patience, and understanding can transform even the most broken situations. And to some extent, that belief is beautiful. Human connection does have the power to heal. Support and compassion can help people grow. But there is a critical difference between supporting someone who is actively working on themselves and trying to carry someone who refuses to confront their own behavior. This is the difficult truth many people eventually face. You cannot heal someone who does not want to heal. Real change is not created by someone else's effort. It is created by self-awareness, responsibility, and the willingness to face one's own flaws without excuses. But in toxic dynamics, responsibility is often the very thing that is avoided. Instead of confronting their actions, the toxic partner may lean on your empathy. They may explain their behavior through stories of past pain. They may describe themselves as misunderstood, damaged, or struggling. And because you care, you listen. You try to be patient. You tell yourself that if you just give them enough understanding, they will eventually grow into the person you know they could be. This belief becomes a powerful emotional anchor. Every time the relationship begins to collapse under the weight of conflict or disappointment, the person shows remorse. Their voice becomes softer. Their apologies feel sincere. They promise things will change. For a moment, the anger disappears. You see the vulnerable version of them again. The person who says they are trying. The person who says they don't want to lose you. and hope quietly returns. Hope is one of the most powerful emotional forces inside the human mind. It gives people the strength to endure difficult circumstances. It allows people to believe in possibilities even when reality feels heavy. But inside toxic relationships, hope can slowly become a trap, because each promise of change resets the emotional cycle. Each apology gives the illusion that transformation is just around the corner. Each moment of vulnerability convinces you that the person you believe they could be is finally about to appear. So you stay. You invest more time, more patience, more emotional energy. But weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And the transformation you were waiting for never fully arrives. Instead, the same patterns repeat. Conflict, apology, hope. Disappointment, remorse, hope again. You begin living inside the potential of who they could become, rather than the reality of who they are. This is where the savior complex becomes dangerous, because the more you focus on rescuing the other person, the less attention you give to protecting yourself. You begin measuring the relationship by their intentions, rather than their behavior. You begin believing that love means enduring pain for the sake of someone else's healing. But love does not require you to sacrifice your emotional stability in order to save another person from themselves. True transformation cannot be carried on the shoulders of someone else's devotion. It must be chosen, it must be owned, and it must be pursued by the person who needs to change. When that responsibility is avoided, the relationship slowly becomes a place where one person keeps hoping, while the other keeps repeating the same patterns that created the pain in the first place. People often ask a question that seems simple on the surface, yet carries a deep misunderstanding of human psychology. When outsiders look at someone trapped in a painful relationship, they ask, if the relationship is toxic, why don't they just leave? From the outside, the solution appears obvious. If something hurts you, you walk away. If someone repeatedly causes pain, you remove yourself from the situation. But human emotions do not operate like logical equations. By the time someone realizes a relationship has become unhealthy, they are rarely standing at the beginning of the story. They are standing in the middle of something that has already shaped their mind, their habits, and their emotional world. Several invisible forces are already working against them. The first force is emotional investment. Relationships are not built overnight. They grow through shared time, shared memories, shared experiences. Days turn into months. Months turn into years. During that time, people invest pieces of themselves into the connection. They share their dreams, their fears, their vulnerabilities. They build routines together, familiar conversations, familiar places, familiar emotional rhythms. When a relationship becomes toxic, those investments do not simply disappear. They remain inside the mind like echoes of what once existed. Walking away does not feel like stepping out of a bad situation. It feels like abandoning something you spent a long time building. The second invisible force is shared history. Human beings are storytellers. Our minds constantly build narratives about our lives. Relationships become part of those stories. You remember the early days, the laughter, the moments when everything felt effortless and alive. Those memories hold emotional weight. Even when the present becomes painful, the past continues whispering reminders of how beautiful things once felt. The mind begins to ask quiet questions. What if things could go back to how they were? What if this difficult phase is temporary? What if leaving now means giving up right before things finally improve? These thoughts create hesitation. They create doubt. But perhaps the most powerful force holding someone in place is psychological attachment. The human brain forms deep emotional bonds through repeated interaction. Over time, the presence of another person becomes intertwined with your emotional stability. Your daily mood, your sense of connection, even your sense of identity can become linked to that person. When the relationship contains cycles of emotional highs and lows, that attachment becomes even stronger. The brain becomes accustomed to the pattern. Conflict, relief. Distance, reconnection. pain followed by brief moments of warmth. This cycle begins to feel strangely familiar. The nervous system adjusts to the rhythm. It learns to expect the tension, and it learns to crave the relief that follows. And because the relief feels so powerful, after periods of emotional pain, the brain begins associating the relationship itself with emotional reward. This is why leaving does not feel simple. Leaving the relationship does not just mean losing the person. It means breaking the entire emotional pattern your brain has adapted to. It means stepping away from the moments of relief your mind has learned to depend on. In many ways, it feels similar to withdrawing from an addiction. Neuroscience research has revealed something fascinating about romantic attachment. When people experience romantic rejection or separation, the brain activates many of the same regions associated with physical pain and substance withdrawal. The emotional distress is not imaginary. It is neurological. The mind reacts as if something essential has been removed from its environment. The absence creates a powerful sense of craving. The person who once caused both pain and relief becomes the center of that craving. This is why toxic relationships can feel almost impossible to escape. Even when someone understands logically that the relationship is unhealthy, their emotional system may still be deeply attached to the cycle. Their mind remembers the moments of warmth, the apologies, the glimpses of connection that once made everything feel meaningful. And so the struggle continues. Part of them sees the damage clearly, but another part still hopes for the return of what once felt beautiful. The most dangerous thing about toxic relationships is not the arguments, or even the pain. It is the illusion that keeps you hoping things will return to how they once were. But the person you fell in love with at the beginning was often part of the psychological hook. The real question is not, why are they like this? The real question is, why am I still accepting it? True love does not require you to constantly prove your worth. It does not confuse you. It does not slowly drain your self-respect. And it does not force you to fight for basic emotional safety. Healthy relationships bring clarity. Toxic ones create confusion. And the moment you begin choosing clarity over confusion, something powerful happens. You stop begging for love. You stop negotiating your self-worth. You stop participating in the mind game. And when that happens, you reclaim something far more valuable than the relationship itself. You reclaim yourself.